Hello, everybody. Scott Golden here with the Tuesday Night Titans TNT review, and this is the January 4th, 1985 edition. We have graduated into a new year, and this is a more focused TNT than normal. Matter of fact, through WrestleMania 1 and the end of March of that year. Matter of fact, WrestleMania 1 falling on the 31st of March in 1985. This is a much more focused program, probably the most fun run of the program over this 4 month period here. So you're going to see a lot of interesting things. You're going to see a lot of a much more promo centered program. So it's going to be kind of diving deep into that, and some fun there, and interspersings of the angles leading up to WrestleMania 1, which was make or break for WWF in 1985. Obviously, because had that show failed, the McMahons would have had to declare bankruptcy again. Anyway, we start with Hulk Hogan training with Hillbilly Jim. Yes, Hillbilly Jim, otherwise known as Harley Davidson out of Memphis, comes in early 85. He had been sitting in the crowd as a fan for several weeks, actually several months, of television tapings leading up to this, and somehow makes the acquaintance of the world champion. This is comedy hilarity gold, which stretches over a few weeks, so we'll talk about this again, but suffice to say, there's spots here where Hillbilly has trouble running the ropes and he's disorganized. He asserts his power and dominance with bear hugs and actually scares Hulk Hogan with how powerful he is. He does powerlifting. Hogan tries to get him to drink the eggs, the protein egg yolk thing, and obviously poor Hillbilly is mortified by this. Really good comedy. See, this is the way to do comedy. You have a premise, and you put a character in a premise. You don't have characters do things that are out of character for them. So it's easy to imagine a world caliber athlete trying to train what is essentially a country redneck type person. It's an interesting storytelling aspect, and I think Vince has lost the idea of characters not getting lost in their angles. Instead, the character being the center for the writing of the angle. I think that's a lost art, and I think it's something that WWE needs to go back to. In any event, we then move on to Nikita Volkov, who this is not his first run in the WWF. It is his most prolific and most successful run through probably 1990, 91, somewhere in there. Anyway, he's here for a good bit. He does take at least one break, I think, in the later 80s, and then he comes back with the Bolsheviks. He may not, though. Anyway, he's talking about wanting a championship match. He's talking about how disrespectful Americans are. He's talking about various nature of wanting to get at Hogan and Tito and all the other champions. And there isn't really talk of him doing the tag thing yet. That comes a little bit later with the Iron Sheik. Freddie Blassie is involved with Volkov at this point. But what's interesting is when he came in 74 through 76, I believe it was. I know it's the mid to late 70s that Volkov's in for a little bit. He was a challenger to the champion at the time, and he did the old apple squashing thing, which he redoes here, but they don't acknowledge that this is something he's done before. Obviously, we go to a squash match for Mr. Volkov. Volkov's not a lot in the ring, obviously. Not a big guy, muscular, broad-chested guy, but really not your best pure athlete. Although his backbreaker is a thing of beauty, this isn't a match you need to go out of your way to see, punch kick style. The use of the backbreaker. The rings in 1985 are much harder, so I think part of him not doing as much was a direct result of the contact with the ring being less desirable than average. And then after that, we move on to Captain Lou Albano says he's saying he's seen the light. We do see but before we get there, we do see the acknowledgement of the Iron Sheik. Volkov and Sheik start to talk about teaming with each other. Classy Freddie Blassie puts them together. Remember, this is at the point where Sheik is about a year removed from being the world champion, so him teaming with somebody is a ringing endorsement. A lot of people forget, yes, the Sheik was only champion for about a month, but it was enough to where, especially being, in the first 10 champions of the organization, it's enough where that's a rub. That's an acknowledgement. Now being champion doesn't mean anything, but then, it's a big deal. And so, as I mentioned, Captain Lou Albano. I mentioned at the wedding a few weeks ago. So this is the first week in January, right after the New Year. The wedding a few weeks before, Albano, and by the way, I did find out that USA Network, where the TNT program aired, did air house shows from MSG and the Cap Center, and I think the Philly Spectrum. No, not the Philly Spectrum. That was Prism, but several places where house shows were run. The weeks that TNT was not on the air, it's because they were airing full cards. And I didn't learn this until they acknowledged it in a later 1985 episode. Next week, we're going to be airing a show from the Cap Center. And I went, oh, that's probably where it is. And then I went to check out. And if you're not familiar with the history of WWE.com, just the most comprehensive results site in the world. If you're not familiar with them, they've got results for Ring of Honor, results for TNA, results for WWE, and all of the ECW, NWA, all of the major promotions, tournaments, television results, all sorts of really nifty things. Biggest project I've ever seen. They've probably been around 20 years, if not longer. But anyway, it was there that I learned that they skipped TNT's to bring live action, and then it was confirmed on a later version of TNT. Anyway, back to the show. Captain Lou Albano talks about, again, his work with Cyndi Lauper, how he's seen the light, how he has talked with Hulk Hogan a bit, and he wants to be a better guy. He wasn't always a good guy. He's grateful for having met Cyndi Lauper. Yes, he helped her, but she did a lot on her own. He's really endorsing Cyndi. He's going over the top. He's apologizing to the people multiple times, and it's just really, it's interesting that they basically used his involvement with charity to turn him, and obviously he becomes a babyface manager that eventually leads to him managing the Bulldogs later in 85, early 86, and he manages George Steele for a bit. But this is the beginning of all of that, worth going out of your way to see. And then the segments that follow, including Roddy Piper, this is the beginning of the war to settle the score and the WrestleMania build and all this stuff. Piper is golden here. I actually would encourage you, if you haven't seen the Piper stuff from the build of for WrestleMania, this entire 3 months that he's on TNT, worth going out of your way to see. Definitely, necessary. There is a bit of the segment, I believe it's this episode, I'd have to go back and check, but suffice to say, they're at the Garden, and I know they replay this multiple times, but they're at the Garden, and Lou receives an award for his charitable contributions and his involvement in the rock and wrestling thing. They bring out a plaque. It's the old, break the plaque over the head, and then Piper kicks Cyndi Lauper in the head, and there's just this violence to it, and Piper is a loose cannon. That whole thing builds over the next couple of months here. But again, the Piper thing, he's insulting Albano, he's insulting Lauper. He actually sneaks the word masturbation onto television, which for 1984 is pretty risque. he says that he is the one to take credit, not Albano, not Cyndi Lauper, not her manager David Wolf, but he should be the one to take credit. He, Albano says here that he's ashamed of what happened. He's not worried about what happens to him. He's worried about what happened to Dave Wolf. He's worried about what happened to Cyndi Lauper. Both of them are just small guys. Who cares what happens to him? He's apologizing. He's livid. He's all over the place. Really good television. If you go out of your way to watch anything from this era, the Piper stuff is just phenomenal. Captain Lou actually is very underrated in this era too, and I had forgotten, or maybe I hadn't paid close enough attention to how integral his humanization is to the push for WrestleMania. Actually, kind of surprised that he wasn't perhaps considered for a managerial role in the WrestleMania 1 main event. I actually am surprised by that. But anyway, that version of TNT, worth going out of your way to see, January 4th, 1985. And we will be back with more TNT in a matter of a few shakes of a lamb's tail.